Coming up, the lure of ISIS.
The Islamic State, in its projection, of course, is quite frightening, quite powerful, which is also quite attractive to some people and empowering.
Former British intelligence official Richard Barrett breaks down who is joining the terrorist group in Syria and Iraq and why. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
Our speaker is Richard Barrett. He is the author of a very timely report entitled Foreign Fighters in Syria. He was a British counterterrorism chief at both MI5 and MI6. He later went on to head the UN team monitoring al-Qaeda. Currently, Richard serves as Senior Vice President of the Sufan Group, a security consultancy whose purpose is to provide intelligence services to governments and multinational organizations.
This whole issue of foreign fighters in Syria really does seem to have captured the attention of the world right now. But just to start perhaps with some brief facts, I mean, it's very, very hard to come to any firm conclusions about numbers, origins, intentions, and things like that. But the best guess is probably there's about 12,000 to 15,000 people from other countries apart from Syria and Iraq who've gone there to join the conflict. Well, 12,000 to 15,000 people, maybe it doesn't sound very many, but if you compare it with the numbers who went to Afghanistan, for example, in the whole 10 years between 1979 and 89, but then on beyond that, while al-Qaeda established itself there and sort of worked up to 2001 attacks, and then the American invasion, which drove most of the foreigners out again. In all that period, probably at the very, very most, there were 20,000. And in fact, people who've studied the problem a little bit more granularly since then reckon that perhaps the number was only about 5,000. So compared to that, in a short period, relatively short period of 3 years or so, we now have 12,000 to 15,000 people going to Syria and Iraq to fight. So that raises lots of different issues, which I'd like to try and explore with you this morning. I should also say that whereas in Afghanistan, most people came from Arab countries, maybe some from Western countries, but there wasn't a great diversity of countries. I've now counted 83 different countries of origin for people who've gone to Syria. And 83 out of a total United Nations membership of 193, that is a pretty significant chunk of countries. Now, obviously, some of those countries will only have contributed 1 or 2 fighters. One shouldn't exaggerate that. But the spread of the message over that geographical and cultural variety is quite extraordinary. And the ages, again, in Syria, Iraq, are very different from how they were in Afghanistan. In Syria, Iraq, you get people, many people, unfortunately, as young as 15 who are going. And it's extraordinarily young to be exposed to the violence and horrors that are going on there. And the average age is probably early to mid-20s. Some people who are older are going. There was a fine example of a good British subject who was 41 with 3 children who blew himself up in a suicide bombing in Syria. But generally speaking, most of them in their late teens, early 20s. And I think that also reflects the sort of youth bulge in Middle East, North African countries, so the demographic fits, if you like, the audience, the constituency. Well, I guess a key question to ask is why do they go? And I think that here, again, we have to understand they're both push and pull factors. And they will vary enormously from individual to individual. And in many ways, you could say that each individual has his own reason for going. But if we look at some sort of common themes, there's enormous disillusion among youth in Middle East, North Africa in particular, but elsewhere as well. And a lot of the people who go have this sense of disillusionment. Maybe they've gone slightly off the rails as well, maybe with relationship problems, family problems or whatever, or just this general sense that they don't really fit in, they don't really belong, they don't really have any real sense of purpose, they don't really have any sense of identity. They don't identify with the governments that run their countries, with the policies that determine their future. And so they are, in a way, wanting to leave their past behind and have this new beginning. Even there's a sort of sense of redemption, in a way, about going. And I want to talk a little bit about the religious drivers as well. But the religion really is a gloss over a much deeper desire for a sense of identity and purpose and belonging. And they want to participate in something too. It's not just a passive motivation. It's much more active than that. But while wanting to participate, they also want to be led. They want to be told what to do. They want some sort of definite sort of direction to take, which can lead at the same time to a very personal, internal sense of fulfillment, often a spiritual fulfillment. And with that, the desire for respect, the desire for recognition, all these things enormously important in countries where there's a vast amount of youth who are all similar. Some may be more employed than others, some may be better off than others, and so on. But fundamentally, they don't feel that the future is particularly interesting, even if it's relatively economically okay. Most of these guys are not very knowledgeable about their religion. Obviously, if they've been brought up in Saudi Arabia or even in some of the North African countries, they will have had a lot of religious instruction, but they're not deeply thinking about their religion. I mean, unfortunately, the way that the Saudi Arabia education system is set up, there's an awful, and this is true also in many Muslim-majority countries, of course, there's a certain amount of rote learning rather than critical encouragement at critical thinking, examination of the issues, and discussion in class. But even, of course, were that to be the case, there would still be many people who reckon that they would go and join this fight in Syria for religious purposes, because the religion tell you that you should do what you can to support your fellows, support the Ummah, the Muslim community, and that this is a good way of doing it because the Muslim community is being persecuted and treated badly, as indeed is the case by the Assad regime. Of course, the reality of what happens when they're there may be completely different, but that religious motivation is a strong one, and one shouldn't ignore it. And it's also a good one. I mean, these people are not going off there to behead American journalists. They're going off there to do something which they believe is good. So they're seeking answers, they're seeking certainty, they're seeking direction, and many converts are going. And I think converts from the West are going, particularly because a convert, by definition almost, is seeking for some sort of broader truth and being offered it in spades, as it were, by the narrative coming out of Syria, Iraq. So I think those are many of the push factors. And then you have the pull factors as well, in that the Islamic State in particular, as it calls itself, not very much Islamic about it, relatively little state about it, but they are welcoming people from everywhere, from anywhere. No questions asked, don't worry about your background, we can understand that you may be in troubles and so on. You just come, you take part, you believe, and then you are one of us. And the Islamic State also, the narrative is looking forward. It's projecting into a much brighter world. You know, forget about what's been going on over the last centuries. This is all new, and you will be part of it. You will be making it happen. Enormously attractive to people. There's this offer of this sort of bright new world, this sort of combined with the sense that there's a great brotherhood, sense of brotherhood, of integration, of we're all chums together type of thing, we're all doing something, we're all highly motivated, and there are going to be lots of people like me. Whatever I'm like, there'll be people like me. Sort of this sort of idea that there's a noble cause, there's your duty, your obligation even, and the Islamic State in its projection, of course, is quite frightening, quite powerful, which is also quite attractive to some people, and empowering. If you associate yourself with something powerful, you are yourself empowered. And also, the Islamic State is not just looking for 6'4" guys who are burly and strong and good with a Kalashnikov. They're looking for everybody. It is a state in the building. And so, in fact, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the so-called caliph, has said very directly in some of his addresses, it doesn't matter whether you can fight or not. We want people. We want people to help us run this state, which means people who can clean the streets, means people who can, keep the lights working, people who can bake bread, anybody who can come. And of course, they're enormously short of people with skills because many of them have gone away, quite understandably. So the welcome mat is very much out there, and it's very easy, of course, to get there. And I just want to quote from something that the CTC in West Point pointed out, that they collected some stories of people who'd been to Syria. And this is a Saudi. And he says, my trip to the Levant, they call it, Sham, the greater Syria, was the fastest one I had done in my life. I departed my city in Saudi Arabia at 10:30 in the evening and reached Idlib at 6 o'clock the following evening. It's amazingly easy then. There's a guy saying, okay, I'm going to go today, and he's there by the next night. I mean, and of course, if you're coming from the west, it's easier still. You just get down to the Turkish border, and you can get across. So here we have the Islamic State offering people a chance to participate in a moment of history. There's a lot of end of times narrative, which is quite complicated in this Islamic projection of what happens in Syria and Turkey in particular. And I think a lot of people feel that what is going to happen there will lead to some conflagration, some major confrontation between the powers of good and the powers of evil, and that they need to take part in that. There's going to be a fantastic battle. Maybe they've been watching too many movies, but that is a very common belief. And we shouldn't discount that either. It may sound ridiculous, but it's quite important, I think. So I'll just quote you another story that somebody said about the importance of going, and even though it was very easy for that Saudi guy, it's not easy for everybody, but you should still persevere. And this story is told a lot as an example of how you should try and overcome every difficulty to be able to arrive there. So it says, a European brother who was poor and had to work in a restaurant to collect the price of his first train ticket, he managed to do that, and that took him from his city to the next station in his trip, where he worked again, and so on. In each city he stopped at, so as to be able to afford to travel on and eventually get to the destination. It took him 6 months to cross the border. He took 6 months. This other guy had taken 24 hours or less. This guy took 6 months by constant perseverance, and then, of course, ended up joining the Islamic State. So I think the reasons why people go are relatively straightforward. We can all sort of understand them, even though we're not queuing up ourselves. The thing is, when you get there, you may not have very much idea about what you're joining. You may not even know what group you're going to join. And there, the Islamic State in particular, but Jabhat al-Nusra as well, the Al-Qaeda affiliate, have set themselves up on the Turkish border so that they are particularly well placed to be the ones who welcome the new arrival and say, okay, this is what you need to do, you need to join us. And I want to quote you another story here because it's a good illustration of what can happen. So this guy from Bahrain decides to go. So he got himself to Turkey. His family was very much opposed to it, but he managed to get his passport and get to Turkey. He got to Istanbul, and he knew he had to get to Istanbul and then get a flight down to the south. And he saw a guy sitting in the departure lounge in Istanbul for this internal flight down south, who was long beard, reading the Quran and stuff, and he thought, oh, probably a guy going to Syria as well. And he talked to him, and sure enough, the guy said, yeah, I'm going to go and join the Free Syrian Army. He said, okay, well, let's go together. And they decided to go together because this guy had a contact down in Rehanla or somewhere like that, near the border. So when they got there, they met up with their bloke, and they got into a house which was run by the Free Syrian Army as a clinic. And because it was being run as a clinic, various other fighters were coming in for treatment. And while they were there, an Islamic State guy came in to visit one of his comrades who'd been wounded, and said, "Oh well, if you're coming over, I'll help you join. So why don't you come with us?" And he brought them over the border, and left them, in fact, with some other oppositionists, but then came back to them and said, you know, if you're joining the Free Syrian Army, you know, that's okay, but, you know, there are problems, and they're not doing a really good job. We're doing a much better job. These are the differences between us, and so on. And he suggested they join the Islamic State. They didn't really understand what this guy was talking about, the differences between the groups and so on, but they thought, well, you know, okay, sounds reasonable. We'll go along with you, and you know, you seem to be willing to take us on, and we want to get active. So they were immediately taken, of course, into this Islamic State training house where most of the instruction is about religion. So they're taught very, very quickly about what they call the true belief. So that's a very Salafist, takfiri belief. And once in there, of course, then they're given training with the arms and stuff like that, and then they're embraced by the organization and would find it hard to get away. So that can happen quite easily, even to people whose destination is already fixed. And the other thing is that how do people know about it apart from reading the newspapers or looking at the internet? Well, there's a huge amount of Twitter exchange about the war, and the use of Twitter by people who are fighting there is really much more about messaging than it is about, oh, here's a link to an interesting article, or why don't you watch this video? There is a certain amount of that, but there's an awful lot of messaging. So there's a huge, once you get into that Twitter bubble, you start exchanging messages. So what's it really like? What did you do? Did you see that? What, you took that picture. Where is that and stuff? And there's that interaction, which happens very quickly, which makes you feel engaged. And they say, well, come on, you're asking about it. Why didn't you come and see for yourself? And these Twitter bubbles, once they're in, are really very hard to leave. Well, not hard to leave. Of course, you can leave them, but they're very hard for other influences to penetrate. They're shut out. So you don't get a lot of depth of understanding. And of course, on the depth of understanding, there's almost no interest and certainly very, very little knowledge in the actual issues of why there's a civil war in Syria. Those are not the issues which concern these guys. Syria just happens to be a place where they can take part in this action, where they can begin to create this pure state. And poor Syrians. I mean, the Syrian locals generally do not welcome the foreign fighters. They just bring trouble on them. But too bad for them. This is where the Islamic State is establishing itself. And the Islamic State is an international project. It's not a Syrian project. It's not an Iraqi project. It is an international project. Although, if you're interested, the Islamic State is essentially Iraqi and much of its leadership very Ba'athist. So people go, they have no knowledge of the local issues, they don't have very much knowledge of what they're getting into and so on, the differences between groups and all that, and a relatively soft belief in values and principles, so that their beliefs are edited and consolidated by people who are pushing them towards this Salafist Takfiri school. But you might say, well, how is that? How can people not have knowledge of what Al-Qaeda and Islamic State are doing in Syria? It's everywhere. And in fact, there was an interesting NBC poll you probably all saw that 94% of Americans were aware of the Foley-Sotloff executions. 94% of Americans. That's way, way higher than the number of Americans who have been aware of any other news event since the NBC started doing these polls. Power of terrorism, the visual images, enormously effective and so on. And so why wouldn't these guys know what they were getting into? Well, there's a lot of sort of discounting that. Oh, well, the particular circumstances, you don't really understand. It's a bigger picture, this sort of thing. And you don't have to get involved in that. You can sort of isolate yourself from that. You can do all this sort of good stuff. So the compartmentalization is quite possible for people going, and they don't really worry too much before they arrive that they're going to get involved in some horrific activities. What happens when they do get involved in those activities? Well, I think some of them are repulsed by them and probably try to leave, and some of them sort of gradually acclimatize, if you like, or accustom themselves to them and take part. But of course, not all the Islamic State is cutting throats the whole time. A lot of it is fighting front lines, trying to build administration and stuff, and now clear up after the airstrikes. Also, another point I'd just like to make briefly is that terrorism has an interesting elasticity from being a terrorist group to being an insurgent group to being a quasi-state, but it can go back again. It can expand, it can contract. So if you knock it back from the state, it then goes back to being an insurgency, and you knock it back, it goes back to a terrorist group. So in a way, I'm not advocating that we allow the Islamic State to thrive, but you've got to expect that the more you attack it, the more it becomes a terrorist group rather than a quasi-state, which is something we all need to consider in the 13 years that we've been tackling this problem so directly since the attacks here in 2001. So we have to deal with the reality, and we have to deal with it in proper proportion, I think, and we have to deal with a huge sensitivity to the narrative consequences, not for us, not for policymakers, but for people who might be tempted to go and fight in Syria, Iraq. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for being so incredibly insightful for us. But the question is, what can be done, let's say in the Levant? We have lived through, and they have lived through the Arab Spring. Is there anything that we can do to encourage the governments in these areas to change improve their policies for young people so they'll be less disaffected?
Yeah, I think there are two very good points there. First of all, if I take the second one about encouraging the governments, this is a regional problem in my view. It's international to a certain extent because stability there is so important to us, but it's a problem that demands a regional solution. And for so long as you get Saudi Arabia and Iran slugging it out, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Yemen, you're going to have these problems continue. You know, there has to be some understanding in the region that threats that they're dealing with in front of their noses, which they think are so very, very real, are actually going to be overtaken by the threats that they're creating at the same time, slightly further away. So I think that all our efforts should be devoted to trying to get the region to work together to try and sort it out, rather than coming in, saving them for a couple of years, you know, and then actually not necessarily getting rid of the problem. Now, as the Arab Spring, well, I think the Arab Spring was enormously successful. I think it was a fantastic thing because although it didn't lead to very many immediate results in changes of government and so on, it awoke understanding and interest in the public, which now you can't get rid of. You know, it's there. And before, Middle East, public opinion, what's that? Who the hell cares? Nobody gave any time at all to public opinion in these states. You can't ignore it now. It's out there. And because of the opportunity for people to communicate so much more easily, it's real. And sure, it dies down, and sure, Al-Qaeda will come in and say, we told you so. If you're not violent, you don't achieve anything. But, you know, it'll come up. And each time it'll go like that, in my opinion.
I just wanted to ask you to reflect on your observation about that this is a regional threat, and to ask you from your expert vantage point, is there actually any infrastructure in the region to allow for a security and political dialogue around the threat?
Well, there are contacts now at an increasingly higher level between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that's really a vital first step, I think. And the overtures were made by Iran. I guess by the Saudi calculation, Iran has got much more to lose than anybody else right now because they did so well from the American invasion that you know, they can only go down if you like. You know, so the Saudis were saying no, let them suffer. Why should we help them? You know, but now I think the Saudis have come much closer. There are different currents in Saudi Arabia. You had the sort of Prince Bandar current, which was very much in favor of arming anybody who would attack Assad, because Assad was essentially an Iranian ally. Shiite, this sort of whole business of sectarianism. There aren't very many Shiites so far as the Saudis are concerned, although about 70% of the Iraq is a Shiite, of course. But still, they were saying, you know, overall, yeah, let's do whatever we can to promote Sunni against Shia. And then you have the Prince Mohammed bin Naif, the interior minister in Saudi Arabia, saying, hang on a minute, this is all going to blow back and affect us. You know, we really don't want to see our own community more radicalized as a result of this. And I think that argument was solved very much in favor of Mohammed bin Naif, with the king issuing a decree in February of this year saying it was illegal, completely against the interests of the state, to go and fight in Syria. So the Saudis are seeing more threat, existentialist threat even, to their regime, because of course, you know, King Abdullah, the whole succession thing is racing towards them, and they really haven't sorted out how to move that down to the next generation. Big issue for stability, internal stability, in my view. So that's coming towards them, and at the same time, the Iranians are saying, yeah, we're a bit uncomfortable with what's happening, so coming together. But you still have this Muslim Brotherhood, anti-Muslim Brotherhood thing, which Qatar, I see, has got a bit closer back with the Saudis, but I don't know, you know, I mean, we still need countries to stand up and take a lead. Egypt would be great, but you know, Sisi, in my opinion, is just not up to that task. And you know, he's not going to offer the leadership.
The United States has now started a coalition of interested countries in the area. But how effective is this going to be? Where will ISIS be in 3 to 5 years?
Thank you. Well, let's say ISIS is two things. It's the political movement, and then it's the sort of idea behind it. And one of the very few things that Ayman al-Zawahiri has ever said that was worth listening to was that for so long as our enemies attack al-Qaeda as an organization rather than as an idea, they will fail. And the strength of al-Qaeda is as an idea. And so that on that ideological underpinning of the Islamic State, you're not going to defeat it by an international coalition, by Security Council resolutions and stuff like that. You're only going to defeat it from within the community itself. So, you know, this is unacceptable. As for the presence of the Islamic State, yeah, you could probably beat it up pretty well, but you're not going to destroy it. There's nothing in there to take its place. And so it could be worse what happens next, or it could be better what happens next. And until there's something else to take its place, there's actually not, in my view, very much point in building a coalition which is just fixed on destroying something rather than building something. And once, you know, if we can build this framework, you know, this regional framework and regional understanding of how the world will be reorganized in that area, then I think Islamic State is, or something that's similar to it, is going to be around for a very long time.
Well, thank you for this very balanced and thoughtful discussion. It was really terrific. Thank you so much.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.